Last week in Delfino Square, I worked on designing the alleyway buildings and came up with something pretty cool. But now, I think it's time to take on those dastardly trees once again, as well as attend some recent feedback. I went ahead and separated the tree and pasted it into a new blank project, where no one can hear it scream. Okay, I'm not gonna murder the tree. Instead, I'll experiment a bit with some different ideas that might make these trees fit better into my scene. Before I can start fixing the tree though, I need to identify what's wrong with it, because it doesn't necessarily look bad, it just doesn't look right. It's sort of at the crux of the confused identity of this new version of the track I'm creating. I'm going for the sort of cartoonish realism of Mario Kart 8's base game tracks, but finding where the cartoon ends and the realism begins can be very tricky. The tree I'm currently using has a stylized cartoony mesh, but has textures that attempt to be realistic. But it's important to note that nothing I use in this track needs to be 100% stylized or 100% realistic. I just need it to be consistent and cohesive. So using a 10% realistic mesh with an 80% realistic texture is going to end up looking wrong. My first idea was to play into the style of the traditional Mario Bros trees, with the color banding and simple geometry, but I stupidly used the same leaf texture that caused issues on the other tree. Now I think this could have worked with a more stylized texture that looked less like clear identifiable leaves. But I still had another idea. I could use a tree from another game entirely, one that's already closer to how I think the trees in this track should look. And eventually, I stumbled upon something from Splatoon 3 of all games. This tree right here could be just what I need, since it's already firmly on the realistic side of cartoony. It took a little bit of work to recolor it, but this makes for a much less confused tree. It also makes for a much more taxing tree, so I worked a bit to bring down the polygon count by deleting some of the branches on the inside that don't really add that much visually. I also brightened up the trunk a bit, and I think we've got ourselves a pretty good looking tree. Now I could come back and see what a more stylized tree would look like as well. Let me know if that's something you want to see in the future. And you know, there's already a ton you guys have suggested in the recent past, so let's get to some of that. First, let's resize the alleyway bricks a bit. They're definitely a bit too large, so I'll scale the UV map up. I also selected the entrance section and rotated the bricks so they're horizontal, which feels a little bit better. Next, I moved back over to the grassy section where I just put down those trees. This looks a little bit boring. Now I do plan on sprucing it up a bit, but it feels a bit too flat. So I subdivided it and started adding some terrain variation. It's subtle, but it's something that'll really help when this area is more detailed. Next, I'll work on making the road look a little brighter. I started off by trying to add some color to the road, something that'll match the orange-yellow theme. But despite putting both of my IQ digits to good use, I wasn't able to come up with something that didn't just look weird. So let me know if you guys have a better way of adding color to this texture. For now, I'll just stick to the good old white color overlay to brighten things up a bit, which did a surprisingly good job. Next, I'll head back over to the bricks in the alleyway and see if I can make them feel more at home in the track by making the green vegetation more yellow. I started off selecting them with the magic wand tool, which is meant to magically select whatever you click on, but I think it would make more sense if it was called the evil cursed artifact tool, because you have very limited control over this thing. It feels like performing surgery with a shotgun, but eventually the operation was complete, and we've got a worse looking brick texture as a result. Now I was really excited about this idea, since I also thought this could really help pull everything together visually, but both yellow and orange colors just make the texture look dingy and kinda gross. But it did bring my attention to the bricks on the corners of the buildings. I'd like these to use a different material than what's used on the pathway, so I found something and unwrapped it a little bit, and I think this looks nice. And that made me realize that the bricks were still too dark on the gray buildings. And you know what? I'm feeling confident. Why don't we fix that yellow building texture too? Nah, nope, no way. Okay, well maybe another time. Let's get that old texture back on there. But the gray building wasn't the only one that was too dark. There's also the brown building. So I did another overlay, and now it's looking a lot more vibrant. While we're over here, we might as well add some variation to some of these windows. I went to a couple of them and shut the shutters, which was pretty easy because that's what shutters are made to do. I tried marginally speeding things up by selecting both and using individual origins to shut both at the same time, but I ended up with some kind of advanced machine thing. Well, I think that's good. I'll probably replace this old shutters texture eventually, but they work fine right now. Let's move over to the white buildings. One thing I can do to make these buildings less plain is to change up the texture on the windowsills. I found something decent and decided to try and optimize these windows too. I started by deleting the back faces, which I should have done before, which cleared up 45 faces. I spent a while trying out different methods of optimizing these needlessly complicated windows. Dissolving faces did lower the polygon count, but triangulating them again to make make them make sense, just brought it way back up again. For now, I'll just leave these as they are and wait until I have a better way of doing this. But something else I can do to improve these white buildings is adding Kuions, which I was totally already gonna add. These are basically just some bricks on the corners, so I added the edges of a brick texture to the edges of this building texture. It took a whole lot of unwrapping, but that's something I should make sure is done anyways in case I want to add more changes to this texture in the future. And there we have it. After updating the windows again to match the bricks on the corners, I think this is pretty nice. Well, that's gonna do it. I hope you guys enjoyed. I'm really happy to keep working on this series, but I also know that it could totally last forever if I let it. And I do want to do some spooky videos in October, but I'd like to always have a series like this going. At very least, touch back down on it every few videos. But right now, I'd love to just keep going on this project. Heck, I could even do a video decorating Delfino Square for Halloween, and maybe at the end of the year do something Christmassy for Coconut Mall. Well anyways, I'll talk to you guys later. Thanks.